A good chunk of MTA revenue comes from real estate transaction taxes. It means every time somebody purchases property, every time property values go up, the MTA gets a cut in the form of taxes. And the reason that's a problem is because the housing market is probably the most volatile market out there. Every 10 years, there's a housing bubble, things are great, and then all of a sudden, everything collapses. In 2007, the authority raked in $1.6 billion from real estate transaction taxes. In 2009, it's projected they're only going to make $544 million. They really have nowhere to go. Since in 82, the state and city paid for 30% of the capital budget. Now they pay for 3% of the capital budget. So in that really short span of time, the amount of funding coming in from the city and the state has been practically reduced by a huge amount. The state has been reluctant for so long to fund the MTA, and this is really a product of the Pataki administration. When he was in power, he was a huge champion of road subsidies, and he won based on the suburban vote because that's what he promised. He's less taxes for the MTA, more taxes are going to go to road subsidy, and that's really where a lot of critics say, and where I think a lot of the MTA's problems started, because that's when they started having to issue all these bonds and pay for capital construction out of the operations budget and out of the fare box. And they're one of the only transit systems in the US that pay for capital construction right out of the fare box. So it's like paying for it from a credit card, because they have to issue bonds based on their projected revenue that they think they're going to get from the fare box. And when they do this, they're creating a huge amount of debt. And by 2012, I think the projected amount of debt is going to be over $2.5 billion total that the MTA owes on these bonds that comes due all of a sudden. They don't have the funding from the housing market. They don't have the funding from the state. So it's like, where's the MTA going to get their money? And that is really problematic because there's no recession-proof source of funding for the MTA. The issue with the board is that most of the people on there are rich people and they're connected people. And that means that they're connected to the real estate industry, they're connected to the automobile industry, one of them is connected to Con Edison. There's a lot of really shady connections in the board that make you really question whose interest the board serves, the interest of 11 million people that use the system every day, or the interests of certain private forces that they're really behind. Nancy Chevelle, who was recently famous because she dated Paul McCartney, she is the vice president of administration of, I think it's called Northeastern Trucking Company, which is, according to their website, the largest privately owned trucking company in the entire Northeast. David Mack, who is also a huge real estate guy, and the number one is the current chair of the board, H. Dale Hemmerdinger, and he has a really large real estate corporation that was started by his grandfather in Queens, something like 100 years ago, and he's built up his family has built up all of this wealth through that, and he actually his wife has made a lot of campaign contributions to Eliot Spitzer, who in turn ended up nominating him to be MTA chair board. And this has happened before with Conway. When he was the MTA chair, he gave a lot of money to Pataki, and Pataki nominated him. So there's also this issue of patronage on the board. The people who are the chairs pretty much determine the way that the board is going, and there really hasn't been anybody who's clean of any of these shady connections for decades on the board. So how can you administer a system that you have no direct knowledge with? Sure, you may know how it works, superficially, but when it comes to like experiencing waiting for the train on the platform, the train not running on time. And the other huge side of the coin with the board is that there are 6 non-voting seats on the board. And these non-voting seats consist of union reps, commuter councils, people who really should have a voice, because they're people who use the system every single day, and basically all they can do is come in, sit, and listen. And when it comes to the power to make decisions on the board, excluded in a way because they really don't have a say in terms of the power of a vote. During the course of writing the story, I spoke to a non-voting member of the board. His name is Norman Brown. He's, I think, the head of the Machinists Union. And he was pretty livid, about the fact that people who represent the average user in the city are excluded from actually having a vote on the MTA board. And he said, without a vote, these people are a little bit like the corpse at the wake. Other systems in the US that this is modeled after also have rotating seats with union members and union reps, like the system in Boston, but they have voting power in those systems. In this system, they don't. The people need to have a say on the board. And the only people with power on the board can't be these rich, connected people, because that's not how you run a system, a public transit system. Maybe a private transit system would work better that way, but luckily we don't have that. But the more we have these kinds of people on the board, the more it is kind of like a system that serves private interests rather than the public good. When it first opened in 1904, it was all private, and there's always been this tension between, but this is a public service. The city used to, build lines and then contract them to these private companies, and then the city took over everything. So there's always been this really interesting tension between public and private when it comes to mass transit in New York City. This is a hugely important issue, and I am available for interview about this, and I can also connect you to Charles Karmanoff, who is a transit activist, and he's a transit economist. He's also extremely knowledgeable. And the article is available for reprint with my permission. So please go ahead and use it and contact me if you're interested.